Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm here with my husband, Sush.
Hello.
And we are doing the ratings and reviews tag, which was created by Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. I was tagged by Jen at Remembered Reads, who I'll link below, and Becca at ReadBecca said it would be really fun to hear Sush's answers to this as well. So I will link all of those original tag videos down below, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. Question 1, tag folks. So for this tag, I found that Sush and I were having such a discussion about the different questions in the tag when we were watching it that made us feel like it would be fun to have a conversation doing the tag ourselves. So I think that I'd like to tag anybody who's watching this who finds themselves having so many different thoughts and responses, because this is one of those great discussion tags. Question 2, how do you know you've just finished a good book? Is it a thinking or feeling response? For me, I think it's mainly a feeling response, in that what I look for most in books is just full immersion in what I'm reading, and that's an emotional response. I also think that I care a lot about whether or not there's interesting things to think about in the book, but my evaluation of whether something's a good book is not based on an objective thinking through what's in the book. It's based purely on how much I enjoyed it, how engaged I was, how much I was thinking while reading it, not as a reflection afterwards. So it's really purely emotional.
I think I'm not going to have a very satisfactory answer to this, because it's just a mix in that there's feeling, there's thinking, there's feeling about how you're thinking, and there's thinking about how you're feeling. So it's like, you know, I tried to come up with a list of books that fit in the categories, and when I knew that this was a really solid book for me, and I got all sorts of responses. And I actually have a couple of examples, if you will. Witness for the Dead, for example, was a feeling book for me that I categorized as. Anthropocene Reviewed was, I think, more of a thinking book. Daniel Evans' The Office of Historical Correction was both. And these are all books that I think I knew around 20-30% into the book that I was going to love them. And as long as the book stuck the landing, so to speak, I mean, I guess in Office of Historical Corrections, it's a CD of short stories, but still the thing holds. And in generally they did. And sometimes it's like, I don't think a book is really working that well for me until it all comes together in the end. And I mean, so for example, I would say Interior Chinatown fits that, I think, for me. Or A Space Between Worlds. I was enjoying it, but I didn't think it was great till close to the end in that sense. And then there were some other books where I finished the book, think it's like, okay, and kind of thing. Then a couple of months later, I'm still thinking about it, and I'm like, no, actually, I got a lot out of that. And so, for example, The Pill by Meg Ellison kind of fits that bill. So it's all over the place and all the kinds of responses. I don't know.
Question 3, when you begin to form your review or rating, what's the first question you ask yourself? I am not at all systematic in the way that I review or rate, simply beyond, did I like this book? What stood out to me? I don't go through a specific list of questions. I don't try to hit on specific ideas, but I just say what stood out in this book that I want to talk about. Really, what is it that I think makes this book special? So it's not very systematic, but that's how I do it.
And for me, I don't know that I'm the intended audience in a sense against for this question, because I don't publicly review or rate. But essentially, I think it comes down to sitting in the experience and reflecting. And again, as with the previous question, this is both thinking and feeling. I think you have multiple factors that go into a reading experience. It's the author's background and philosophy and what informs them in writing this work, how well they executed and what their intention was, and my personal background and philosophy and what I see in things. And matches or mismatches in any of these aspects can lead to a reading experience working or not.
Question 4, do you do star ratings? Why or why not? And then some follow-up questions. A, if yes, explain your star rating system. What does a good book get in your rating system? Is your star rating consistent? Are all your 5-star books better than all your 4-star books? And then B, if no, what language do you use to convey the quality of a book in your reviews? And does this form an informal rating or ranking? So yes, I use star ratings, although I definitely don't think it's a perfect system. I do think that it's a nice shorthand. I use star ratings just to talk about my engagement in a book, how much I enjoyed it. And I think that that is a useful thing if you want to just get a quick idea of how much enjoyment I got out of a book. But I don't think that that's very useful by itself for somebody else knowing if they're going to enjoy it or not. I do try when I'm giving my reviews to provide a lot of context and a lot of detail about what worked and what didn't work and what was specific to my reading style or what stood out about the book. And I just think that that star rating is not so informative in and of itself, but it is, again, something I use as a shorthand, although I think that in the future I could be convinced that it's not worth it.
So I think for me, it's kind of like, again, yes and no answer. I think yes in reality and no in spirit is kind of where I wind up landing for this. I do rate books, but I keep my ratings private for most part. And it's like the distinction that I try to draw is that this is my personal reading experience of the book. I don't think that generalizes or averages well with others' experience of the books. They're a me rating in that sense. And so basically I tend to find myself not being comfortable with making that public. I think this also is a little bit of a hold off in a sense from my personal background in growing up in the Indian academic environment, which tends to reduce students to numbers. And it's like, okay, everyone's ranked kind of a thing. And there is a shade of that that I think affects me in this as well. So it's like, again, aggregating numbers and pooling as a way of defining the worth of a thing is something that I chafe at. Also, there's one more aspect of this, which is that Netflix used to do this thing about 10 years back. They've kind of slowly petered off that, which is trying to say people similar to you rated this book 4.2 stars. You know, that sort of a thing, which is, I mean, kind of based on something called collaborative filtering or content filtering. Which I think I would be much more okay contributing to a system like that rather than something that just did an aggregate 4.33 stars across all reviewers kind of a thing. And the reason for that is that I think I have a tendency to be quite harsh in a lot of my ratings. And I feel like when I pick a book that I like and I rate it 3.5 stars, even though I really, really enjoyed it, that is almost hurting the book in a sense. And then there's a question of I start asking myself, should I just bump everything up 1 star and then rate? And then I chafe at that. So I think it's a combination of things like that in a sense that lead to me not being public about my star ratings.
And I think that because I do review publicly, that's almost one of the reasons why I give public star ratings is because I want to make sure that I'm supporting authors. And I think that when it comes to, especially some of the books that I read have very, very few ratings, every 4 or 5 star rating makes kind of a big difference. I do not rate things that I DNF though, and I'm pretty firm about DNFing in that I DNF anything I'm not enjoying, which means that I finish very few books that are below 3.5 stars. And I feel like I don't want to rate something 2 stars simply because it wasn't for me. And so when I DNF something, I'm like, this isn't for me, this isn't really working, and it's not an objective, it's in no way an objective rating. So I don't want to bring an author down simply because it wasn't a match for me, but I do kind of want to uplift the authors when I think they're doing something that was really great, and I want to share that experience, and I want to give them the boost because even though an average star rating is not a great useful measure, it is one that affects whether or not other people will pick up their books.
I think that's a fair point. And when you mentioned objective, I was also reminded that is, I think, the huge part of that. There's a way in which star ratings can sometimes appear objective, whereas they are subjective. And I think there's a good amount of value in, if you watch a booktuber, for example, and you kind of have an idea of what they look for, to know that this person rated it 4 stars conveys subjective value. And so I think that there is use in that. I just happen to be a little more antisocial, and this kind of feeds along with that.
Yeah. And I think also that idea that what is a 5-star book varies so greatly. I mean, it varies pretty significantly between me and Sush. And like, we have so much overlap in terms of what we care about in books and all these sorts of things. And yet our rating system is often about a star off. So for me, I rate purely based on engagement. 5 stars for me means I was thoroughly engrossed in this book. I was in this world, in these characters. Nothing drew me out of the story. To me, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking, doesn't have to be pushing an envelope, doesn't have to be the best writing I've ever read. It just means it gave me exactly what I'm looking for in a reading experience, which is just that feeling of being so into the book the whole time. And the way that my rating system works is I just take off a half star for kind of everything that pulls me out of the story. So if there is like some plot holes, or if I think that the writing isn't as good or anything like that, that just kind of brings it down, such that basically 5 stars is loved it, had such a good time. 4 stars is great book, but there were some issues. 3 stars is I had lots of issues, but there was still some value in it. And then if I get down to 2 stars, it was like, why didn't I just DNF?
So my rating system, I think I start with a 3.5-ish, in that this is what I expect most books to be. In that I enjoyed it. The book did nothing wrong terribly, and didn't wow me completely either. So it's kind of like the default rating in a sense, and then things go up or down from there for various reasons. Typically, I also rate by engagement, but I kind of feed in a little bit of theme and messaging into that as well. And so associated with that, I think that for a book to go up from 3.5 to 4, it needs to have done something for me interesting, or some theme needs to really work for me, or something needs to have excelled past that point of, oh, it was a good read, sort of a thing. So then 4 is kind of that realm. 5 used to be things like books of the decade for me, but that has become more lenient, and I do give up multiple 5 stars in a year. And 4.5 is very much the, oh, this would have been almost a perfect book, but there are some aspects that brought me out of it. So usually 4.5 is a 5 minus 0.5, whereas 4 is like, great book, that sort of a thing. And then there is this notion of a 3, where I have nothing against the book, okay, but nothing in the book really wowed me either. 3.5, sorry, is very much where I'm still engaged throughout the book. A 3, there's something that didn't have me engaged throughout the book. And in a sense, I think what's kind of funny about this is Wheel of Time, for example, is a favorite series of mine. Most of the books in the Wheel of Time series actually fall at 3 or 3.5, okay? I would say the Penrick novellas are some things that I really love, okay? And I would say a lot of the books in that get around a 3.5, okay? So it's kind of like, this is my default-ish rating. And going slightly into a stats kind of a thing, I average almost consistently around 3.6 stars in my yearly readings.
Whereas mine is around 4.3.
So it's kind of like, that tells you about the anchoring effects in a sense. And then there's, for something to hit 2.5, it needs to have not worked about something, or something about it bothered me, and that sort of a thing, And I think frequently there are cases of, unrealized, privilege, or rather, being unaware of the privilege that is, the center point of the story, or having some amount of unobserved racism or sexism and things like that. Good example here is a lot of classic PG Wodehouse. Things that I really, really like will wind up at this, because it's like, it just bothers me in some kinds. So it's kind of like, it's not that it wasn't a great book, I mean, like the story and that sort of a thing, but there's some aspects that really brought it out for me, or brought me out of it. So I think that's where I go into the 2.5. And it's not a author ban or any of those kinds of things. at 2 stars, I start moving from a this story didn't work for me to a if I have multiple 2 stars by this author, then I think this author is not for me kind of a thing. And so it kind of is one step further. 1 and 1.5 stars, and I have given them out, basically are the realms of I'm frustrated and ranting at the end of the book. Okay. I try not to do this to myself anymore. Shannon categorizes these books as hate reads for me, and I used to kind of push through. I used to get stubborn about it's like I'm not enjoying a book, but I need to see it through because this is challenging myself. And I kind of had that kind of a mentality about it. But over time, I've started recognizing that it's better to DNF those things. So even while I think I'm challenging myself, that's not really true. Books that I don't necessarily agree with, but are challenging and are showing a different perspectives, I tend to rate higher than this level. So, for example, Nicholas Nassim Taleb has written a lot of books where I like the analysis, even if not the premises. They score well above this 1.5 things. Those books are challenging reads. These are not. So I'm trying to be better about DNFing this. And yet, I would say that I roughly rate 2.5 stars as much as I rate 4.5 or 5 stars in any given year. So I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. And I have rated at least one book that I know of 0.5 stars. I really do not wish to do this to myself anymore going forward.
Yeah, I think that I discovered when a couple of years ago was part of an in-person book club that forcing myself to read something that I just wasn't enjoying, I didn't actually gain very much from it because I kind of disengaged anyway. And so I think that I am very prone to just DNFing rather than getting those reads that are such low stars.
I tend to get argumentative with the book. I start trying to get into a frame of trying to analyze the argument from a dispassionate kind of a way, but that's a lie. It's not really dispassionate. Yeah. And it's, and it's like, what am I getting out of it? After many such attempts, I'm like, no, I'm not actually doing the thing that I think I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very hard to be truly objective in a read. And so if you accept your subjectivity, then I think it's easier to let a book go because it's not necessarily saying like, I need to evaluate this book fairly. It's saying, you know what, this book just isn't for me. And then the last part of this question, just before we go on forever, is whether or not your star ratings are consistent. Is a 5-star always better than a 4.5 star? And I would say that my star ratings are always consistent in terms of my engagement when I read it. And since that's what my star ratings mean for me, that's always consistent. However, that doesn't mean that every 5-star book is better objectively or for other reasons than every 4.5-star book. So I have plenty of like 4.5 or even 4-star books that I would consistently want to reread or that I would recommend to people, even though there's plenty of 5-star books that I wouldn't really do that with. An example of this is I read Uncanny Magazine issue 24, Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction. And I have recommended this book to so many people. It's a magazine issue, has a bunch of different short stories and a bunch of nonfiction essays. I gave it 4.5 stars because some of the essays and some of the stories just weren't as good, but the collection as a whole was so good, and it's really informed the way that I think about disability representation in SFF. I have a review for it, by the way, so I'll link it below. So even though it wasn't like a perfect read, it has so much staying power. But I don't think that the 4.5 rating is wrong. It's just that there's more to a book than the rating.
Agreed with the more to a book than the rating. And my ratings, I would say, are consistent-ish in that, yes, in general, I did think that a 4.5 was better than a 4 for me. And you mentioned a really important thing, which is at the time you read it. I do go back and edit my ratings all the time. So it's I think at least 5-6 books in any given year see plus or minus 0.5, and I go back even 2-3 years and I will edit my ratings. But that doesn't mean that it's when I rethink about that book and I'm like, wait, but no, this actually meant something, or it's like, no, that was terrible, what was I thinking? So I have done those. So.
Question 5. Do you believe that every book has its perfect reader? Does this contradict the idea that a book can be bad? So I definitely think that each reader has their own experience with a book, and that can vary really widely because so much of people's experiences are just subjective and based on their own personal taste. So just like with music or other art forms, a lot of it is the interaction between you as the reader and the book itself. So I think that I don't know if I would say that there's a perfect reader for every book, but there's definitely a wide spectrum of experiences. And even within people who have similar tastes to me, I see huge variations in terms of what works and what doesn't work. So it's a really complex interaction. And I don't think that the idea that some books can work better for some people or worse for some people really kind of, I don't know that I believe in the inherent badness of books. So I think that when you talk about badness of books, you're using a quality judgment, and that's inherently subjective, not objective. And so what makes something a bad book depends on the reader. And I think that there can be stuff that I find bad or I find harmful. Like, for example, I will struggle if the writing uses forms or grammar or something that just doesn't work for me as a reader, or I might struggle if some of the themes or the politics or the ideas I dislike or I find harmful. But, I think when you go down the idea of trying to say that a book is objectively bad, you move into the territory of things like book bans, which I am very much against, because I think that, again, like that value judgment is really not something that should be put onto artwork.
I think we are fairly similar in this regard. I think that there is a market for every book, but it's possible for the execution to not work in a way that basically sabotages its own reach to the market that it's going for. And so there is such a thing as a bad execution of a book, but that is not to say that there isn't a perfect reader for that. I also think that there are many books that might get at my personal value judgment, and I still consider them good books. So as an example, like the Bean series of, follow-up series from Ender's Game is something where I think the author's politics does come into play in the book, and I didn't enjoy some of those aspects, but I still think are good books. On the flip side, I think the idea is that there are things where I agree with the politics of it, and I don't think the execution works. And so basically, there's all shades of these kinds of things. And basically, I think there's also this notion of I used to really try to hit an academic neutral kind of a thing, and saying, actually, before I go into the academic neutral, my default position when a book doesn't work for me is to say that it doesn't work for me rather than to say that it is a bad book. And I generally do not try to use the word bad. But as Shannon was mentioning about the harmful books, I think that is a distinction there. And I don't shy away from calling those books bad books nowadays. And this is a position that I have evolved over time. I used to be in a sense of academic neutral kind of a thing, trying to say that it's like all books have inherent value. And sure, they do. And I don't want to get into bans of books per se, because I think that's a personal value judgment that I'm applying here. But I think there are some books that are, or not just books, works that are harmful and I think propagate harm. And I don't want to now say that it's like, oh, it just didn't work for me. I do actually call them bad in those cases. But again, subjective judgment, not, yeah.
Question 6. What book that you hated have you recommended? So there are very few books that I have hated, and those ones I won't recommend because, like we just talked about, those are generally ones that I found harmful. However, some of them I know that lots and lots of other people love, so I'm not against them recommending that book, if that makes sense, but I wouldn't recommend it if I actually hated it. However, there's plenty of books that I didn't enjoy reading that I have DNF'd or that I have given, 2 or 3 stars to, that I still think have value for other readers that I could recommend and that I, in a sense, have recommended. So often when I'm reviewing a book, I try to talk about the things that I thought worked, the things that didn't work for me, and specifically why they didn't work, because often there are very specific things that will just ruin a reading experience for me, such as too much violence or gore, and that's something that is not the same for all readers. There's other readers who are totally fine with that. So, for example, Jen at Remembered reads a ton of war, fiction, and nonfiction, and she is 100% okay with all kinds of violence. And so I've had her respond to some of my reviews saying, oh, that book sounds really interesting, when it's something that I DNF'd because I couldn't handle it. Or similarly, I don't like books that are fast-paced. Anything that's too plotty, too much action, too much twists and turns, it just doesn't work for me. But that works for so many other readers. There's so many other readers who are very plot-based. And so when I'm reviewing things, I'm trying to say, who could this work for, even if it didn't work for me? And in that way, I'm often recommending books that I have DNF'd.
So for me, hate is a strong word. And while we just discussed hate reads previously, I have not recommended any of those books to anyone. Having said that, I was trying to think of what books that I've disliked that I have recommended. And I had a couple of answers come out almost immediately, and that is a couple of management books. Okay, in that I think that management books are such an interesting breed of, well, nonfiction-ish books, but they're really just ideology essays in a sense. And sometimes they affect the workplace and they form a core of your environment. So even if I don't like them, it's useful to be aware of them. And so I think that's a special case where I think there is definitely, it fits under the challenging read style of thing in a sense.
Question 7. What makes a book good, bad, or great by your evaluation? So this isn't something that I have like a rubric that I'm grading books on, but I do tend to notice that when I don't enjoy a book, certain things pop up a lot. So for me, books that I don't enjoy tend to be fast-paced or violent or angsty. These are all kind of big turnoffs for me, and so that's kind of what tends to make a bad reading experience for me. Not to say that there aren't books that I've loved that have had aspects of those, but those frequently pop up. For good books, some things that pop up a lot is that they have great world building. That's something I care very deeply about. Or great characters. Like, those are the things that make a book really enjoyable for me. And then the things that tend to make a book great, like an excellent reading experience, is when it then takes that those good experiences and deepens them through really great theming, or like excellent political or social discussions, and also just really beautiful writing. I love it when there's very poetic writing or really great atmosphere, those sorts of things. That kind of takes it above and beyond for me.
Very similar for me, really. I think theming and messaging wind up mattering a good deal for me as much as execution. I think that if it is fiction, then for me, I really get invested in the characters. Not so much necessarily in the character growth as much as in the character detail. And if it is speculative fiction, then world building matters a great deal for me. Plot does not matter as much for me unless it detracts. So it's kind of like it varies, I guess, is the thing. Yeah.
Question 8. When evaluating the quality of a book, do you have specific criteria or aspects of a book, such as character development, that you consider? Does this change if you're writing an in-depth review versus just thinking about a book for enjoyment? Like I mentioned in the previous question, I don't really have a rubric for how I evaluate a book, but I do think that it does make a difference if I'm reading a book just for myself versus knowing that I'm going to publicly review it. It is definitely something that I've noticed in before BookTube and after BookTube in terms of how I talk about a book, how I think about a book, especially because before joining BookTube, I really was not very reflective at all in my reading process, and I read purely for enjoyment, except that I found that over time, I was struggling to enjoy what I was reading because I didn't I wasn't finding as much enjoyment and fun and engagement in what I was reading. And once I got in the habit of really reflecting on my reading, as well as listening to other people reflect on their reading, I started to recognize what it was that I wasn't enjoying in books and what I was enjoying. And so that act of reflection, that act of public reviewing has actually greatly increased my enjoyment of reading and greatly increased my ability to find books that are doing the sorts of things that I really get a lot out of. And so I think that even though I don't have a specific rubric, the very act of public reviewing has made me understand my own reading experience a lot better.
I think for me, I'm not publicly rating or reviewing, but Shannon getting into that has definitely affected my experience with reading, and definitely reflecting a lot more on each reading experience has improved my engagement with the books that I read. So definitely rediscovering reading as a hobby, not just as something you do every so often for fun, like active hobby, has been really great for me. Having said that, while I don't have any sort of rubric or anything like for general purpose reading, other than what I mentioned before about the star rating, so to speak, I do have a rubric that I follow for my Hugo rankings, and I thought I'd share that.
And as a note, the Hugos are an SFF award that we vote in, and so it sort of, the votes matter a little bit because it affects who wins awards.
So I use a rubric, and then I just I reflect on each book, rate them according to the rubric, and whatever the rubric says is my ranking, I use that as my ranking. Sometimes it may cause a 1-2 ranking difference in how I felt about the book in terms of just my reading enjoyment of it, but that's okay, kind of a thing. So basically I rate 8 different axes from 0 to 2, and I'm pretty strict or brutal about this, and then I just add them up together. The axes are as follows. 1, enjoyment. Did it suck me in and make it difficult to put down? 2, did the writing have wit or charm that made you appreciate how they were phrased or written? 3, did it have an emotional impact on me? 4, story arc. Did it lead somewhere? Did the story have depth? 5, characters. Did I like the characters? Did I think that they had depth and were explored well? 6, world building. Did the world feel fascinating or interesting, well fleshed out? Was the atmosphere something that felt like its own character? Then 7, did it do something new or interesting? Is it innovating in some way? 8, did it champion an underrepresented viewpoint? And this can range all the way from, say, normalizing to representing to championing, and there's different shades of that. So each of these things, and mind you, just because I'm using a rubric does not make it objective again. They're still very much subjective, but it acts as a guide to kind of figure out, different aspects of my evaluation. And I don't have a different rubric for theming and messaging, despite me saying that's really important, because I feel like theming and messaging actually impact several of these axes already. So it's already kind of reflected in this thing. And I frequently wind up giving zeros. And as a stats kind of aside, so to speak, if you look at a Hugo slate, it typically has 6 nominations, and I just wind up rating the huge full slate and as an addition to try and see how I felt about that slate for the year. The strongest slate of all the things that I have reviewed for Hugo so far was in novellas for 2020, where I gave 53.5 out of a max possible of 96. Okay. And this slate included The Deep by River Solomon, Haunting of Tramcar 015 by P. Jelly Clark, Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom by Ted Chiang, and To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. So, all books I really enjoyed, and this is as strong as the slate has gotten. On the low end, I would say it was Novelettes for 2019, scoring only 25.5 out of 96. So it's kind of like this thing. This is a rubric that I kind of use for ranking when it comes to Hugos.
Yeah, I feel like ranking is somehow a lot harder than rating.
Yes.
Because you've got two, 5-star books. How are you going to choose which one you rank as higher? So I think that's really useful. I just go by gut. Question 9. Do you consider star ratings or average ratings when choosing what to read or add to your TBR? So I don't look at average ratings at all. I really don't care about average ratings. I don't find them useful. Sometimes I think that I will notice it simply when I go to the Goodreads page, but I'm not seeking out that number. However, I do care about the star ratings that my friends have given it, especially if it's something I'm on the fence about. I might go and look and see who else that I know has given it a rating. I will count their reviews as infinitely more useful than their ratings though. Most of the books that make it onto my TBR are on there because I've heard a review that makes a book sound interesting. And those ratings are more for things that I haven't heard so much about, or are older books and maybe I haven't heard anybody review recently, or that I just kind of forgot what people had said, or things where I have some concerns. And sometimes I'm going to see, like, did other people have issues with this book? But the most useful thing is simply associating that rating with the reviewer, because I know that I have similar tastes to some people and different tastes from other people. And so I kind of try to put it into context.
For me, I don't look at star ratings as much as possible. I don't, as much as I don't make my star ratings public, I don't look at other people's star ratings either. Every so often it'll wind up that I've thoroughly enjoyed a book, and then I will go look at reviews on Goodreads or something like that after I've finished it, and I'll be like, how is this only 3.89 or something like that, So I can't completely avoid that feeling, but I think that's the only time that I wind up looking at star ratings that other people have given as an aggregate, usually also.
Question 10. Who on BookTube does reliable and interesting reviews of books that can help you decide if a book is for you or not, and what makes the reviews so good? Basically, everyone I watch on BookTube I think does great reviews, and that's why I watch them. There are such a wide variety of types of readers and types of reviewers, and I find all of them really helpful and really interesting for different reasons. So some people I will really look for what they're reading in terms of graphic works, or other people I'm like really interested in what they're reading in terms of middle grade or poetry. Other people it's SFF, so each person has kind of their niche and what I go to them for reviews for. But I would say that probably the reviewers who I find I'm really paying attention to what they love the most is Rachel at Culinati and Cynthia at Book Whimsy, because we have the hugest overlaps in our taste. So it tends to be that if they like a book, I probably will like a book. It's not 100%, but it's really, really frequent. And I find that we often are picking up books that we've heard the other mention. So sometimes it's just really funny how many times I have a TBR or a set of books that I've read that are heavily influenced by these two booktubers, just because I know that there's a really solid alignment in our tastes. But that doesn't mean that all the other booktubers I watch don't have excellent reviews. It's just they have different tastes from me, but I still find it really fascinating to watch their reviews.
And my answer is kind of like a continuation of that. It's on the same lines, in that most of BookTube that I watch isn't necessarily for the purpose of recommendations, as much as people really enjoying the books that they're reading, and what they got out of it is something that is something that I find enjoyable. So it's not necessarily just recommendations. Tastes vary widely. And so basically, I think a lot of my favorite booktubers that I watch are not necessarily people that have the same taste as mine. Secondly, I think there is a notion of a taste match, and then there's a notion of a lens match, wherein are they looking for similar-ish aspects about books compared to you. And so I think that also winds up mattering a lot in terms of recommendations. Yeah. And then, sorry?
Just in terms of, for me, that's a really good point. One of my favorite booktubers is Kristen at Kristen L. SFF Reader, and we have a really similar lens match, but huge difference in taste. So often I'll love a book that she'll hate, or she'll love a book that I hate, but I love her lens. And so that's really true. That's another thing that I pay attention to.
I think the thing is, so the lens match is another aspect, right? And then there's a notion of people who have different lenses from yours still wind up giving you new perspectives that you kind of are exposed to, and that's kind of neat. So it's like a combination of a lot of things. It's like there's a taste, there's a lens, there's a diversity in seeking out reading experiences. There is, how widely are they picking out different kinds of books? So a lot of these factors go into it. So, but if we kind of stick close to the whole people I get recommendations from that lead to me tagging a lot of books. Outside of Shannon, I would say that the booktubers most responsible for this are, of recent, Becca from ReadBecca. And over time, I have to say Rachel from Kalnadi is responsible for more books that I have tagged than pretty much anyone else.
Question 11. Do those booktubers use different language from you to evaluate the overall quality of a book? Not exactly. So I think that every booktuber talks about books in a slightly different way. Everybody has their own language that they use and their own way of talking about a book. But what I really am paying attention to when looking at the way people review books is their perspective, where they're coming from, the context and their viewpoint and really what they're looking for in a book. So with Rachel and Cynthia, I think that one of the things I really pay attention to and really value in their reviews is a lot of the background knowledge and interests that they have in how they review. So for example, with Rachel, she comes from like this huge interest in crafts. She does a lot of work with fiber arts. She does a lot of gardening, all these sorts of things. And so anytime she reviews a book that has to do with that, I take it a little bit more seriously because I feel like she's a little bit of a hobbyist and expert in that. And she also reads extremely widely in the classics in SFF. So I always like to hear her perspective on the genre and on books and how they fit in the genre and what they're in response to and all that sort of stuff. So because she brings that context in, I really like to hear her opinions on that. And that brings extra knowledge and expertise into it. Similarly, Cynthia brings so much expertise into everything she reviews because she's an academic, she's a historian. And so even though she reads tons of stuff just purely for fun, she also talks a lot about history and politics and social issues when she's reading anything that has those topics in it. And so I take that really, really seriously when she says something is a good historical representation or brings up interesting issues. And so I like hearing their expertise, and that makes their reviews even more meaningful to me.
I think for me, I've tried to look at different ways of answering this question, and I think that is definitely a good interpretation of it. I'm still unconvinced about what the intent of the question is, I'm afraid. But the people that I've mentioned previously, I think they have different lenses and styles, so yes-ish. But at the same time, they're hitting a lot of the similar beats that I kind of look forward for. They go into details of what they like or didn't like about a book. They get personal and provide the details of the why. They discover and read books that are interesting to me. Watching their content typically helps me kind of, reflect on things. Frequently, it's like if it's a channel that Shannon and I watch together, then we'll pause and have an impromptu discussion in the middle of, and those kinds of things are a lot of fun. And them really enjoying it brings me joy. And so it's a combination of these kinds of things. So it has similar-ish beats in what I look for, and this is kind of my taste in what I look for in a channel. So there is that commonality as well. In terms of varying language, the one other thing that I have to kind of add into this is the cowrie system, cowrie shell system that Injiri from Onyx Pages has. And I think that was definitely something that was very interesting when I first came across it. And it introduces new language to kind of reflect upon the reading experience of a book. So those kinds of things also matter a huge deal. And so it's kind of like what is this question getting at? I have different answers. So, yeah.
And I think that like Injiri is such a great example. Her kind of tagline is read with purpose. And I think that even just that very simple tagline is something that has been hugely influential to my approach and how I read books. And there's some other booktubers as well who I see the way that they read and the way that they review, and it really helps me think about how I read and review, and so they're very meaningful in that way as well. Okay, so those are our answers to the ratings and reviews tag. Clearly we had a lot of different thoughts on this. I think this tag is really great for discussion and reflection on the way that you approach your ratings and reviews, so that's really excellent. If you guys have any thoughts, if you have any similarities to the way that we review and rate or any differences, I'd love to hear about it. I think this is just such a great tag for discussions. Just leave us a comment down below.